the violet gas giant, roughly named Cyclops by the local dockhands, dominated the reinforced viewport of Station Obsidian. It churned in slow, bruising swirls of amethyst and charcoal, casting a bruised light over the chaotic sprawl of the trade hub. Inside the station, the air was a recycled soup of ozone, fried synthetic spices from the hawker stalls, and the underlying coppery tang of unwashed bodies and engine grease. Holographic advertisements flickered and buzzed against the corrugated metal walls, selling everything from jagged scrap metal to transient companionship. Elias Thorne pushed his way through the crush of the mid-level promenade. He was in his early 30s, possessing the kind of face that suggested he had seen too much for his age but refused to take any of it seriously. He was not a soldier. He was a salvage specialist, which was a polite way of saying he was a professional scavenger with a license to touch things other people were too afraid to float near. He adjusted the strap of his canvas satchel, feeling the heavy, uneven weight of the maglock tools inside. He was stubborn, a trait that kept him poor, and quick-witted, a trait that kept him alive. The job had come through an encrypted channel, anonymous and high-paying. Recover a drifting courier pod located 20 kilometers outside the station's safety perimeter. Bring it to Bay 12. Do not ask questions. Standard procedure for the gray market. 2 hours later, Elias was floating in the absolute silence of the void, his magnetic boots clanking softly against the hull of the recovery target. The pod was a sleek, silver teardrop, unmistakably Valkyrie in design. It was military grade, designed for speed and stealth, but it was currently tumbling end over end like a dead leaf. Elias keyed his comms, speaking into the helmet of his enviro suit. Control. This is Thorne. I have eyes on the target. No beacon. No thermal signature. It looks dead. The only response was the static hiss of cosmic radiation. He manually overrode the airlock seal. The hatch gave way with a vibration he felt through his gloves rather than heard. He pulled himself into the cramped interior, his helmet lights cutting through the darkness. It was not just dead. It had been scrubbed. Elias drifted further in, his boots finding purchase on the floor grating. The interior should have been a mess of biological residue if the pilot had died from life support failure, or chaotic debris if it had been an attack. Instead, it was pristine, sterile. The command console had been scorched by a precision plasma burst, melting the plastic into slag. He looked at the pilot's chair. The restraints were cut, but there was no blood. Whoever had been here had been removed with professional efficiency. Something was wrong. This was not a salvage operation. This was a crime scene cleanup. He moved to the rear compartment, his instincts screaming at him to leave. He ignored them. He needed the credits. He pried open the maintenance panel beneath the scorched console. There, tucked away in a subspace usually reserved for emergency rations, was a hidden compartment. Inside sat a single object, a data shard. It was a black prism, cold and heavy, stamped with the intricate geometric seal of the Valkyrie High Command. Jackpot, Elias whispered, though the word felt hollow. He pocketed the shard, sealed the panel, and scrambled back to his shuttle. He did not tow the pod. He engaged his thrusters and burned hard for the station, the prism burning a hole in his pocket. Back at Bay 12, the atmosphere had shifted. The usual clamor of mechanics and loaders was gone, replaced by a tense, vibrating silence. As the airlock cycled and the ramp of his shuttle hissed down, Elias saw why. A Valkyrie honor guard stood in a perfect semicircle. They were 7 feet tall, encased in ceramic alloy armor that shimmered like beetle shells in the harsh dock lights. They held shock lances, weapons that could boil the blood of a human in seconds. In the center stood a woman who made the heavy atmosphere of the station feel thin. She was taller than the others, her armor etched with gold filigree. She removed her helmet, revealing skin the color of polished bronze and eyes that glowed with a faint, bioluminescent violet light. Scar-line tattoos ran down her neck and disappeared beneath her collar, pulsing softly with a rhythm that matched her breathing. She was beautiful in the way a thunderstorm was beautiful, terrifying, elemental, and indifferent to the survival of onlookers. She was a high champion. Elias had seen them on news feeds, usually standing over the burning wreckage of conquered cities. The champion stepped forward. Her voice was a resonant hum, producing a sonic vibration that rattled Elias's teeth before his translator implant could catch up. "You are the scavenger," the translator voice said, overlaying her alien dialect with a flat, synthetic monotone. "You are in possession of military property. Surrender it." Elias swallowed, forcing his heart rate to slow down. He stepped off the ramp, keeping his hands visible but empty. "I am a salvage contractor," Elias said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline. "I was hired to recover a derelict. I do not know anything about military property." The champion tilted her head, her luminous eyes narrowed, scanning him. It felt less like a look and more like a tactile sensation, a scan searching for weakness. "The pod was empty," the champion said. Her translator glitched, the sonic resonance of her language overwhelming the cheap human tech in Elias's skull. The words came out garbled. "The vessel. Devoid of meat. You possess the egg of knowledge." Elias blinked. "Egg of knowledge." He suppressed a nervous laugh. "Look, lady," Elias said, crossing his arms, "I found a burned-out husk. If there is data on it, that constitutes salvage rights under maritime space law. I am not handing over anything without a receipt and a guarantee of payment." The champion stiffened. The soldiers behind her shifted, their grip on the shock lances tightening. "You demand a mating ritual?" the translator offered. "Struggling with the Valkyrie concept of binding agreements. You require flesh contract?" Elias choked. "What? No. I want a paper trail, a legal receipt, bureaucracy." The champion stared at him. The tattoos on her neck flared brighter, turning from a soft pulse to a steady, angry glow. She took a step closer, invading his personal space. She smelled of ozone and crushed mint. "You are small," she said, her own voice bleeding through the translation now, rich and dark. "But you have the stubbornness of a herd beast. Do not test my patience. Scavenger." "Give me the shard." Elias looked up at her. He noticed the way her gaze lingered on him. It was not the look of a soldier inspecting a threat. It was the look of a predator confused by prey that refused to run. She was measuring him. "I need a name for the receipt," Elias said, pushing his luck to the absolute limit. "Kalen," she said. "High Champion Kalen of the Third Fleet." "Well, Kalen," Elias said. "Send the credits to my account and I will hand over the drive. Until then, it is collateral." For a second, he thought she was going to kill him. Her hand twitched toward the blade at her hip, but then she stopped. She snapped herself back into a rigid posture of discipline, a mask of cold command sliding back over her face. "You are playing a dangerous game. Little human," she said. The station's proximity alarms blared, cutting the tension like a physical blow. A red light began to strobe in the hangar bay. "This discussion is not over," Kalen said. She turned and marched her squad out of the bay, leaving Elias standing in the wash of red light, his knees suddenly shaking. He did not wait. He ran. Elias had a workspace in the tangled roots of the station. down in the lower levels where the gravity plating was inconsistent and the rent was cheap. It was a junkyard lab, a closet filled with cannibalized monitors and unauthorized decoding decks. He bolted the door and shoved the black prism into his primary reader. The encryption was military grade, complex and aggressive, but Elias was good at breaking things. He bypassed the security handshake, tricked the system into thinking he was a Valkyrie terminal, and opened the root directory. The screen flickered, resolving into a grainy video feed. Elias watched, his blood running cold. The footage showed a council chamber. He recognized the Valkyrie High Matron, an elder with silver eyes sitting on a throne of obsidian. She was speaking to a hologram of a general. "The envoy must be eliminated," the matron said. Her voice was clear. "We cannot allow the peace treaty with the human colonies to go forward. But the yield," the general argued. "The war is necessary," the matron replied. "We need the pretext to secure the border worlds. The ashlight harvest is behind schedule. We need the energy. Kill the envoy. Blame it on human terrorists. We will use the outrage to launch the invasion." The video cut to a spreadsheet. It was a list of planets. Next to each name was a number labeled Ashlight Yield Target. They were talking about harvesting planetary energy, a forbidden process that stripped worlds of their magnetospheres and left them as radiation-soaked graveyards. And they were starting wars to cover it up. Elias sat back, the chair creaking. He was holding proof of a false flag operation that had killed thousands. The Valkyrie leadership was murdering their own people and framing humans to justify a resource grab. A piercing siren shrieked through the station, louder than the proximity alarm. It was the emergency broadcast. "Attention!" A synthetic voice boomed. "Anti-terror protocol initiated. Suspect identified. Elias Thorne. Level 7. Kill order authorized." They were not coming to arrest him. They were coming to erase him. Elias grabbed the shard in his satchel. He kicked open the back vent of his lab just as the front door exploded inward in a shower of sparks and metal. He scrambled into the ventilation shaft, the heat of the blast scorching the soles of his boots. He dropped down a maintenance ladder, sliding past spinning fans and dripping coolant pipes. He burst out into the neon chaos of the undercity market. Drones buzzed overhead, their scanners sweeping the crowd with green lasers. Elias pulled his hood up, weaving through the throngs of panicked shoppers. He ducked behind a stall selling grilled lizards, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had to get to the transmission array at the top of the station. He had to broadcast this. He sprinted toward the anti-grav elevators. A Valkyrie drone spotted him, its optical lens flashing red. A bolt of plasma sizzled past his ear, blowing a crater in the wall next to his head. "Move!" Elias screamed, shoving a startled tourist out of the way. He dove into a freight chute, sliding down the slick metal surface, tumbling through the dark until he was spat out onto a maintenance bridge. The bridge was a terrifying span of transparent alloy connecting two habitation spires. Below his feet, there was nothing but the terrifying drop into the vacuum of space, protected only by the force fields of the docking ring. The violet light of the gas giant glared up at him, dizzying and immense. Elias scrambled to his feet, running for the other side. A figure dropped from the rafters, landing in a crouch that cracked the alloy plating. It was Kaylin. She rose slowly, her armor vents hissing as they released heat. She blocked the only exit. Her face was unmasked, her expression unreadable. "Give it to me," she said. Her voice was not distorted by the translator this time. She was close enough that he could hear the natural resonance of her throat. Elias backed up, hitting the railing. He held up the shard. "Do you know what is on this?" he shouted, the wind whipping his hair. "Do you know what your leaders are doing?" Silence. Kalen commanded. They killed the envoy, Elias yelled. He activated the shard's projection mode, throwing a small, flickering hologram into the air between them. It showed the matron's face. It played the audio. The ashlight harvest is behind schedule. Kill the envoy. Kalen froze. She watched the hologram, her luminous eyes widening. The glow of her tattoos flickered erratically. That is a fabrication, she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. It is real, Elias said, stepping forward, his fear momentarily replaced by anger. Look at the timestamps. Look at the encryption signatures. It is your own command codes. They are starting wars to harvest ashlight. They are bleeding worlds dry and using you to do it. Kalen looked at the shard, then at Elias. Her hand, which had been reaching for her weapon, hesitated. She looked at his face. She saw the sweat, the terror, and the absolute unshakable conviction. He was not lying. Heavy boots thundered on the metal behind Elias. He spun around. 3 Valkyrie execution officers had emerged from the freight chute. They wore the black armor of the Inquisition. The leader carried a ritual blade, a jagged edge of vibrating crystal designed to sever heads. Target acquired. The executioner droned. Contaminant. War spawn. Elias was trapped. Kalen in front of him. The executioners behind him. Execute, the leader said, raising the blade. Elias braced himself, closing his eyes. There was a blur of motion, a rush of displaced air, and the clang of metal striking metal. Elias opened his eyes. Kalen stood between him and the executioner. She had drawn her own weapon, a dual-bladed energy staff, and blocked the ritual sword inches from Elias's face. Sparks showered down around them like fireworks. Step aside, champion, the executioner hissed. He is marked for death. Kalen did not move. Her back was to Elias, a wall of ceramic and muscle. The scar lines on her neck were blazing with blinding white light. No, she said. He is an enemy of the state, the executioner shouted. He is under my protection, Kalen roared. She shoved the executioner back, creating a circle of space. She looked at the drones hovering above, recording everything. She looked at the execution squad. Then, she took a breath that seemed to pull all the air out of the bridge. She turned her head slightly, locking eyes with Elias over her shoulder. Then she faced her kin and shouted the words that would destroy her life. He is my mate. The declaration hit the bridge like a physical shockwave. The executioners recoiled as if struck. The leader lowered his blade, his jaw going slack. On the station's PA system, a chime sounded. Automated legal AIs, programmed to recognize the sacred vocal patterns of the Valkyrie bond oath, began to process the claim. Biometric scanners swept the bridge, locking onto Kalen's elevated heart rate and Elias's proximity. Bond claim registered, the station's computer announced, its voice devoid of judgment. Combat is suspended. The pair is inviolate under the law of the First Union. You cannot be serious, the executioner whispered, horror in his voice. You claim this? Soft flesh. This worm? He is my mate, Kalen repeated, her voice dropping to a lethal growl. Touch him, and you declare war on my entire bloodline. The executioner sneered. You have no bloodline anymore, traitor. The High Command will strip you of your name. Then come and take it, Kalen snarled. She grabbed Elias by the harness of his suit and yanked him backward, toward the maintenance door behind her. Run, she commanded. The truce of shock lasted only a second. The executioner screamed an order, and the squad opened fire. Plasma bolts splashed against the energy shield Kalen deployed from her gauntlet. She shoved Elias through the door and into the gunmetal corridor beyond, placing her body between him and the fire. The heat was intense, singing the edges of Elias's clothes. "Why are you doing this?" Elias shouted as they sprinted down the hallway. "Shut up and run!" Kalen yelled back. They burst into a private hangar bay. A sleek, predatory skiff sat on the pad, Kalen's personal transport. She threw Elias into the cockpit and vaulted into the pilot's seat. She slammed her hands onto the controls. The engines screamed to life, blue fire erupting from the thrusters. The hangar doors began to close, triggered by the security override. "Hold on," Kalen warned. She punched the throttle. The skiff shot forward, scraping the closing doors, peeling paint and metal as it corkscrewed out into the void. They blasted away from the station, the G-force pressing Elias deep into the crash webbing. Behind them, the station's defensive turrets lit up, tracking them. Kalen flew with terrifying precision, weaving through the traffic of incoming freighters, using the massive bulk of cargo ships as cover. She dove toward the debris ring of the Violet Giant, plunging them into the chaotic soup of ice and rock. Only when the sensors showed clear air did she level the ship out. The cockpit was silent, save for the hum of the reactor and the ragged breathing of two people who had just stepped off a cliff. Elias unbuckled his restraints, his hands shaking so hard he could barely work the clasp. He looked at Kalen. She was staring straight ahead, her hands gripping the flight yoke until her knuckles were white. The glow of her tattoos was fading, leaving her looking exhausted and diminished. "You said..." Elias started, his voice cracking. "Back there. You said..." "I know what I said," Kalen snapped, not looking at him. "You called me your mate. It was the only way to stop the blade," she said, her voice tight. "The bond claim is the oldest law we have. It supersedes military orders. Even the Inquisition hesitates to violate it." "So it was a lie," Elias said, feeling a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. "A trick." Kalen finally turned to look at him. Her violet eyes were dark, swirling with an emotion he could not name. "It is not a trick, human. The law is absolute. By speaking the words, 'I have invoked the rights,' the station's AI has already broadcast it to the sector. As far as my people are concerned, we are bound." She looked down at her hands. "And by using the sacred right to protect an enemy of the state, I have committed high treason. I can never go home. I am a traitor to my blood." Elias stared at her. She had been a high champion, a pinnacle of her society, and she had thrown it all away in a split second. For him. For the truth. "Why?" Elias asked softly. "You could have just taken the shard. You could have killed me." Kalen looked back at the viewport, at the endless star field. "I saw the footage," she said quietly. "I saw the matron's face. I have fought in those border wars for 10 years. I have sent good soldiers to die. I told them it was for the survival of our species." She closed her eyes. "If it was all for profit, if it was all a lie, then I have been a murderer for a decade." She opened her eyes, and they were hard again. "I did not save you, Elias Thorne. I saved the only proof that I am not a monster." The cockpit was small. He could feel the heat radiating from her armor. He could smell the ozone and the faint biological scent of her skin. And he felt something else. A low, humming vibration at the base of his skull. It felt like a thread being pulled tight, connecting him to her. The bond interface. He realized with the start, it was real. It wasn't just words. He looked at her profile, the sharp lines of her jaw, the strength in her shoulders. He reached out, almost touching her arm, then pulled back. "Thank you," he said. "Do not thank me yet," Kalen said, pushing the throttle forward. "We are not dead, but we are being hunted by the most powerful military fleet in the galaxy, and we are flying a ship with half a fuel cell." She glanced at him, and for the first time the corner of her mouth twitched upward, a microscopic smile. and you still owe me a receipt." Elias laughed. It was a jagged, hysterical sound, but it felt good. "Yeah," he said, "I guess I do." He looked out at the stars. He had spent his whole life dealing in scraps, in dead things, in data. He had thought truth was just another commodity to be sold. But as he looked at the woman who had just burned her life to the ground to stand beside him, he realized he was wrong. Truth wasn't data, it was gravity. It was the thing that held you to the floor when the world turned upside down. And for the first time in his life, Elias Thorne had something worth standing for. The proximity alarm screamed, a ragged, piercing tone that tore through the cramped cockpit of the stolen skiff. Outside the viewport, the universe was a kaleidoscope of violence. The debris ring of the violet gas giant was a grinding river of ice and jagged rock, and Kalen was flying directly into it at speeds that made the inertial dampeners whine in protest. "Hold on!" Kalen shouted, her hands flying across the haptic control surfaces. Elias Thorne gripped the crash webbing of the co-pilot seat, his knuckles white. "Hold on to what?" Elias yelled back. "We are in a soup can doing Mach 3 through a blender." 3 Valkyrie interceptors dropped out of the high-orbit shimmer, their profiles sleek and predatory. They did not fire warning shots. Green plasma bolts slashed through the void, vaporizing a chunk of ice the size of a habitation block just meters off their port wing. The shockwave slammed into the skiff, sending it into a sickening spin. Kalen did not panic. Her face was a mask of terrifying focus, the scar lines on her neck glowing with a steady, rhythmic pulse. She killed the main thrusters, flipping the skiff end over end to use the momentum of the spin to dodge a second volley of fire. "They are locking on with seeking torpedoes," she said, her voice calm. "We cannot stay in the ring." "Where do we go?" Elias asked, fighting the urge to vomit as the artificial gravity fluctuated. "Down," Kalen said. She slammed the throttle forward, diving the ship toward the moon that loomed below them. It was a hateful-looking world, wreathed in perpetual gray storms and bruised clouds. Lightning arced across its surface, visible even from orbit. "That is a storm moon," Elias said. "The wind shear alone will tear us apart." "It is that or the torpedoes," Kalen said. "Brace for impact." The descent was not a flight. It was a controlled fall. The atmosphere hit them like a solid wall, the hull screaming as friction turned the heat-shielding cherry red. Turbulence rattled Elias's teeth in his skull. The interceptors peeled off, unwilling to follow them into the atmospheric soup. But Kalen kept diving. The ground rushed up to meet them, a landscape of jagged obsidian ridges and ruins half buried in gray sand. "Pull up!" Elias shouted. Kalen fired the retro rockets. The sudden deceleration slammed Elias into his seat harness with crushing force. The landing skids hit the rock, snapped, and the skiff skidded, sparking and shrieking, carving a furrow through the ancient stone before crashing into a drift of ash and silence. For a long moment, there was no sound but the ticking of cooling metal and the howl of the wind outside. Elias groaned, fumbling with his buckle. "Is everyone alive?" he rasped. Kalen was already moving. She kicked open the jammed cockpit hatch, letting in a gust of freezing, grit-filled air. "Move," she ordered. "The fuel cells are ruptured." They scrambled out into the storm, stumbling away from the wreckage just as the reserve tank caught fire, sending a plume of blue flame into the gray sky. They took shelter in the lee of a massive, toppled pillar. The ruins around them were colossal, the remnants of an architecture that predated human spaceflight by eons. The stone hummed with a faint, nauseating vibration. Elias looked at Kalen. She was slumped against the stone, clutching her side. A jagged piece of shrapnel from the console had pierced the armor weave at her waist. Her blood was dark, almost black in the dim light, and it hissed slightly where it touched the air. "You are hurt," Elias said, moving toward her. "Stay back," Kaylin snapped. She pulled a med injector from her belt. With a grimace that bared her teeth, she ripped the shrapnel out. She did not cry out, but a sharp psychic spike of pain slammed into Elias's head, so intense it made his vision swim. "Ow," Elias yelled, clutching his own temple. Kaylin paused, the injector hovering over the wound. She looked at him, confused. "I did not touch you," she said. Elias rubbed his forehead. "I know," he said, "but I felt it. It felt like someone drove a nail into my skull." Kaylin stared at him for a second, then pressed the injector to her wound. The device sealed the flesh with a hiss of bonding foam. Elias winced as a ghost sensation of burning heat washed over his own side, followed by a dull, throbbing ache. "The bond," Kaylin muttered. "It is sinking faster than it should." She stood up, testing her range of motion. She was efficient, brutal with her own body. She checked her weapons, the energy staff and a sidearm pulse pistol, ignoring the blood smear on her armor. "We need to move," she said. "The interceptors will have marked our crash site. Recovery teams will be here within the hour." Elias shivered. The wind on this moon was cutting, dropping the temperature rapidly. He was wearing a standard flight suit, not combat armor. "Can we salvage anything from the ship?" Elias asked. "I am freezing. I need a blanket." Kaylin frowned, her translator implant humming softly as it processed his request. "A blanket?" she repeated. "Yes," Elias said, hugging himself. "A blanket, a thermal sheet, something warm." Kaylin's expression darkened. She stepped forward, looming over him, her eyes narrowing. "You wish to deploy the ceremonial surrender cloth?" she demanded. "You wish to signal to our enemies that we are defeated before the battle has even begun?" Elias blinked, staring at her. "What? No. I am cold. I want to not die of hypothermia." In Valkyrie military dialect, the word you use translates to the white shroud of the conquered, Kaylin said, her voice dripping with disdain. "I will not allow you to shame me by waving a flag of submission." "It is not a flag," Elias shouted, exasperated. "It is a piece of fabric. My species does not have heat-regulating beetle shells." Kaylin stared at him, the wind whipping her dark hair around her face. She looked at his shivering frame, at his blue lips. The anger drained out of her, replaced by a flicker of something else. Confusion, perhaps, or realization. She reached up and unclasped her heavy cloak, a garment made of ballistic weave and lined with thermal fur. She threw it at him. It hit him in the chest with a heavy thump. "Put it on," she said gruffly, "and do not ask for surrender again." Elias wrapped the cloak around himself. It was huge on him, smelling of ozone and her distinct scent. The warmth was instant. "Thank you," he said. "We are moving," she replied, turning her back to him. They walked into the ruins. The structures were vast, cyclopean arches and tunnels bored into the rock. The walls were lined with veins of a glowing purple substance that pulsed in time with the throbbing vibration Elias felt in his teeth. "Ashlight residue," Kaylin said quietly. "This moon was harvested." Elias ran his gloved hand near the wall. The air crackled. "This is what they want?" he asked. "It is pure energy," Kaylin said. "It is the lifeblood of a planet's magnetic field. When the High Command harvests it, they strip the world of its shield against cosmic radiation. Everything dies. But the energy, it can power a fleet for a century." They entered a long tunnel, sheltered from the wind. The silence here was heavy, oppressive. As they walked, the sensation of the bond grew stronger. It wasn't just physical pain anymore. It was emotional bleed-through. Elias felt a sudden wave of crushing anxiety that wasn't his own. He looked at Kaylin. She was walking with a steady, confident stride, her face impassive. But inside, she was terrified. She was thinking about the executioner. She was thinking about the look on the matron's face. She was thinking that she had just ended her life. "You are scared," Elias said softly. Kaylin stopped. She did not turn around. "I am a high champion," she said. "I do not feel fear." "You do," Elias said. "I can feel it. It tastes like copper and static. You are terrified that you made a mistake." She spun around, pinning him with a glare. "Do not presume to know my mind, human." "I do not have to presume," Elias said, stepping closer. "I am in your head, and you are in mine." He saw her eyes widen slightly. She felt it too. She felt his awe of her, his confusion, and beneath it all, a sudden, sharp spike of attraction that he couldn't suppress. She took a step back, as if burned. "The law says the bond is legal," she said, her voice tight. "It is a bureaucratic status. You said it was biological," Elias countered. "You said it was sacred." "It is a chemical trigger," she snapped. "It is designed to ensure compatibility for reproduction. It is not supposed to happen with an alien. It is not supposed to happen with a prisoner." "I am not your prisoner," Elias said. "You saved me. I claimed you," Kaylin said. "That makes you my responsibility. It does not make us partners." "Which part of you is lying to save me?" Elias asked quietly. "The soldier who wants to follow orders? Or the woman who stood in front of a plasma blade?" The air between them seemed to charge with static. The bond hummed, a high-pitched whine that pulled them toward each other. It was a physical gravity. Kaylin looked at his lips. Elias looked at the scar line pulsing at her throat. The desire was sudden, overwhelming, and terrifyingly alien to both of them. It felt dangerous, like standing on the edge of a fusion reactor. They leaned in, drawn by the invisible wire, their breaths mingled, misting in the cold air. A boom echoed through the tunnel, shaking dust from the ceiling. Kaylin snapped her head toward the entrance. The moment shattered instantly. "Tracker skiff," she hissed. She grabbed Elias's arm and hauled him deeper into the dark. They ran until the tunnel opened into a massive central chamber. Shafts of light from the storm outside pierced the gloom, illuminating a floor covered in floating motes of ash. In the center of the chamber stood a holographic projector, old and flickering. But above it, descending through a breach in the dome, was a Valkyrie dropship. It touched down with a heavy thud, the ramp hissing open. A woman walked out. She was a mirror to Kaylin. But where Kaylin was bronze and gold, this woman was chrome and silver. Her armor was polished to a mirror sheen. She held a heavy repeater rifle with casual ease. "Commander Vora," Kaylin whispered. The woman's voice was amplified, booming through the chamber. "Champion Kaylin," Vora said. Her tone was conversational, almost bored. "You have caused quite a mess. The High Command is embarrassed." Kaylin stepped out from behind a pillar, pushing Elias behind her. "The High Command is corrupt. Vora," Kaylin shouted. "They are harvesting worlds." Vora sighed, a sound of exaggerated patience. "We are warriors, Kaylin. We do not ask where the sword comes from, we only ask where to swing it. Surrender the human asset. The matron has authorized a memory wipe for you. You can be reinstated. You can be forgiven." "And the human?" Kaylin asked. "He is evidence," Vora said. "He will be processed." "Processed meant disassembled. Never," Kaylin said. Vora shrugged. "Then you are erased." She raised her hand. and 6 hunters cloaked in stealth armor shimmered into visibility around the room. "Run!" Kaelin shouted. She raised her staff and fired a blinding burst of light at the ceiling. A massive slab of stone, loosened by centuries of decay, cracked and fell, crashing between them and the hunters. Dust billowed out, creating a wall of gray fog. Kaelin and Elias sprinted into the side passages, the sound of plasma fire chewing through the rock behind them. They navigated the maze of the lower ruins. The ash motes here were thick, swirling around them like angry spirits. Elias paused by a wall covered in carvings. "Wait," he said, panting. "Look, the carvings were pictographs. They showed tall figures, Valkyrie, arriving on worlds. They showed the Valkyrie shaking hands with smaller figures. Then, the next panel showed the Valkyrie planting machines into the ground. The final panel showed the world dying, the smaller figures withering, and the Valkyrie leaving with glowing canisters." "They knew," Elias said, running his hand over the stone. "This isn't new. This is history. They have been doing this for thousands of years. They promise protection, and then they eat the planet." Kaelin looked at the carvings. She traced the line of a Valkyrie helmet. "I was raised in the war temples," she said, her voice hollow. "They told us we were the guardians of the galaxy. They told us the ashlight was a gift from the gods, given only to the strong." She looked at Elias. "I always wondered why the gods always lived on planets we had to conquer first. I asked my instructor once. He broke my jaw." She touched her face, as if remembering the pain. "I learned to stop asking. I learned to obey. Until I saw you on that bridge." Elias pulled the data shard from his pocket. "We have the proof," he said. "We just need to broadcast it." He slotted the shard into a portable reader he had salvaged from his belt. The screen lit up. "Damn it!" Elias cursed. "What?" Kaelin asked, scanning the hallway for pursuit. "It is incomplete," Elias said. "The data, it is locked. It is a 3-part encryption. This shard is just one part. It is a tri-seal." "What does that mean?" "It means I cannot broadcast the footage without the decryption key," Elias said. "And the metadata says the key is hard-coded into the High Matron's personal archive." Kaelin went still. "The archive," she said. "That is inside the temple fortress, on Varos, the capital city." "We have to go there?" Elias asked, his voice rising an octave. "To the planet where everyone wants to kill us?" "It is the only way," Kaelin said. "If we run, Vora will hunt us down eventually. If we want to live, we have to cut the head off the snake." A sound of engines whined nearby, not the high-pitched scream of a Valkyrie interceptor, but the coughing, rattling chug of a freighter. "Smugglers," Elias said, "scavengers coming to pick over the crash site." They crept toward the sound. In a canyon outside the ruin, a rust bucket ship sat idling. A group of rough-looking aliens, Rhodians and humans were loading debris. "I will handle this," Kaelin said, reaching for her weapon. "I will commandeer the vessel." "No," Elias said, grabbing her arm. "You walk in there like a Valkyrie champion. They will shoot you or sell you out to Vora for the bounty. You need to be less terrifying." "Less terrifying?" Kaelin scowled. "Let me talk," Elias said. "Put your helmet on. Hide the face. Slouch a little." They approached the ship. The smuggler captain, a 4-eyed Rhodian with a cigar clamped in his mandible, leveled a blaster at them. "Lost friends?" The Rhodian clicked. "We are travelers," Elias said, putting on his best harmless idiot smile. "My mistress and I, we had engine trouble." "Mistress?" the Rhodian asked, looking at Kaelin's armored form. "She is a mercenary," Elias lied smoothly. very expensive, very mute, taking a vow of silence until she kills her next target. I am her bond attendant. Bond attendant? Kaylin's head snapped toward him, the helmet masking her expression. Yes, Elias continued, ignoring her. I carry her luggage. I polish the armor. I provide companionship. It is a very prestigious position in her culture. The Rhodian laughed, a wet, hacking sound. You are a pet, then. Elias shrugged. The pay is good, and she lets me sit in the front seat sometimes. We need passage to the rim. We can pay in refined ashlight residue. He held up a canister he had scooped from the ruin floor. It glowed with high-grade energy. The Rhodian's eyes widened. Get on board, the captain said. Do not touch anything, and keep the mute in the cargo hold. As they walked up the ramp into the shadow of the cargo bay, Kaylin let out a sound that it was sharp, short, and barking. Elias froze. Are you choking? He whispered. Kaylin removed her helmet. She was grinning. It was a fierce, sharp expression, but it was genuine. Bond attendant? She wheezed. You polish my armor? I was improvising, Elias whispered furiously. It was creative, she admitted. Her smile softened, just for a second, making her look less like a statue of war and more like a person. You are a ridiculous creature. Elias Thorne. The cargo hold was cramped, smelling of sour milk and hydraulic fluid. The ship blasted off, the inertial dampeners failing to compensate for the turbulence of entering hyperspace. The ship lurched violently. Kaylin stumbled, and Elias caught her. They crashed against a stack of crates, tangled together in the dark. The bond flared. This time, there was no pain, just heat, a rush of adrenaline and dopamine that flooded both their systems. Elias could feel her heart hammering against his chest. He could feel the texture of her desire. It was sharp, demanding, and overwhelming. He looked up at her. Her luminous eyes were dilated. The scar lines were glowing a soft, rhythmic pink. Kaylin, Elias whispered. She pressed her forehead against his. Her hands gripped his shoulders, hard enough to bruise, but she didn't push him away. The bond wants us to complete the cycle, she whispered, her voice trembling. It demands it. Do you want to? Elias asked. Not the bond. You. Kaylin closed her eyes. She took a shuddering breath. I have never been asked what I want, she said. I have only been told what I must do. She pulled back slightly, creating a sliver of space between them. I want this, she admitted, the words raw, but not like this. Not because a chemical is telling me to. Not because we are afraid of dying. She looked at him, her gaze fierce and vulnerable. I will not take you. Elias, not until it is a choice. For both of us. Elias reached up and touched her cheek. Her skin was burning hot. Okay, he said. We wait. He did not pull away. He stayed there, his forehead resting against hers, their breathing falling into a synchronized rhythm. The sexual tension was thick enough to choke on, but beneath it was something stronger, a foundation. They stood there in the dark of the smuggler's hold, hurtling through hyperspace toward a hostile planet, holding on to each other not as owner and property, but as two people trying to keep their footing in a universe that wanted them dead. Restraint, Elias realized as the bond hummed a frustrated but steady note between them, was the loudest way to say I trust you. Varos was a wound in the universe that had been dressed in finery. From orbit, the planet was a swirling marble of dark clouds and crimson storms. But on the surface, it was a terrifying monument to martial perfection. The capital city of Oakvar hung suspended between jagged mountain peaks, a sprawling lattice of obsidian spires and suspension bridges that defied gravity. below the city, in the deep chasms of the planetary crust. Rivers of bioluminescent algae glowed a toxic, radioactive green, casting long, sickly shadows upward against the belly of the metropolis. Elias Thorne adjusted the heavy cowl of his pilgrim's robe, the rough fabric scratching against his neck. He felt exposed, despite the disguise. The air here was thin and sharp, smelling of ozone and hot metal, a scent that seemed too aggressive for human lungs. "Keep your head down," Kaylin murmured. Her voice was a low vibration, barely audible over the din of the street. She was dressed in the leather apron and soot-stained tunic of an armorsmith, her distinctive glowing tattoos hidden beneath a high collar and a layer of cosmetic grime. She carried a heavy crate on her shoulder, walking with the trudging, weary gait of the working caste, completely suppressing the lethal grace of a high champion. "We are walking right into the mouth of the beast," Elias whispered back, his eyes darting to the crimson banners that draped every building. Each one bore the sigil of the High Command, a stylized eye wreathed in flame. "It is the last place they will look," Kaylin said. "They expect us to be running for the outer rim, not buying spice tubers in the shadow of the matron's palace." The street was a crush of bodies. Valkyrie of all castes moved with purposeful intensity. There were warriors in gleaming carapace armor, priests in flowing red silk, and laborers hauling sleds of refined ore. The atmosphere was not one of oppression, but of fanatical unity. Loudspeakers mounted on the spires blared constant updates on the war effort, praising the bravery of the fleets and listing the quota of ashlight harvested for the glory of the Empire. Elias felt a strange sense of vertigo. This wasn't just a military base, it was a civilization built entirely on the concept of necessary violence. As they passed a checkpoint, a guard in heavy shock trooper armor scanned the crowd. Elias, trying to blend in, noticed a group of laborers making a sharp, fist-to-throat gesture as they passed the soldier, thinking it was a standard sign of respect. Elias caught the guard's eye and mimicked the motion with enthusiastic precision, adding a little nod for good measure. The effect was instantaneous. The guard stiffened, his hand flying to the shock baton at his hip. The laborers around Elias gasped and scrambled back, clearing a circle around him. "Challenge accepted," the guard roared, his amplifier turning the words into a deafening boom. "You dare challenge a centurion of the 4th cohort to the blood dance. Little pilgrim?" Elias froze, his hand still halfway to his throat. "The what?" Elias squeaked. Kaylin dropped her crate with a heavy thud. She stepped between Elias and the guard, her posture shifting subtly from weary laborer to something more fluid. "Forgive him, honored centurion," she said, her voice pitched high and obsequious. "My bond servant is simple. He is human." The guard sneered, looking down at Elias. "A human? Why is he making the gesture of mortal combat?" "It is a misunderstanding," Kaylin said quickly, placing a hand on Elias's shoulder and squeezing hard enough to grind bone. "In his culture, the throat slash is a gesture of romantic submission. He is merely complimenting the shine of your armor. He thinks you are very attractive." The guard blinked behind his visor. He looked at Elias, then back at Kaylin. "He is flirting with me?" "Aggressively," Kaylin confirmed. "He has no shame." The guard took a step back, visibly uncomfortable. He waved his hand dismissively. "Get him out of here, Smith, and teach him to keep his affections to his own species. It is unnatural." "We go," Kaylin said, grabbing Elias by the collar and dragging him away before the guard could change his mind. Once they were safely lost in the steam of a dumpling alley, Kaylin slammed Elias against a wall. "Romantic submission?" Elias hissed, rubbing his shoulder. You challenged him to a duel to the death, Kalen whispered furiously. The throat gesture means you intend to drink his blood from the source. I thought it was a salute. Elias defended himself. Everyone was doing it. They were pledging their lives to the state, Kalen said. You were pledging to murder a centurion. Do not gesture. Do not speak. Just walk. They moved deeper into the city, toward the upper levels where the government archives were housed. As they ascended the gravity lifts, the propaganda screens became larger and more frequent. Suddenly, a massive holographic projection lit up the side of a skyscraper. It was the face of Commander Vora, the silver-armored antagonist who had hunted them on the moon. She looked regal, sorrowful, and terrifyingly convincing. Citizens of Varos, Vora's voice thundered across the skyline. We face a new and insidious threat. Our beloved champion Kalen has been compromised. A human agent, a known mind thief, has used forbidden psychic technology to enslave her will. Elias watched, his mouth falling open. On the screen, a doctored video played. It showed Elias standing over a kneeling Kalen, his eyes glowing with fake digital effects, appearing to brainwash her. He has seduced her mind, Vora continued. He has twisted her loyalty to the high command into madness. Do not listen to her lies. She is a victim. Kill the human, and we save the champion. The crowd around them murmured in anger. Elias pulled his cowl lower, his heart hammering against his ribs. They are rewriting the narrative, Kalen said, her voice tight with suppressed rage. They are stripping me of my choice. If I rebel, it is madness. If I love, it is mind control. They cannot admit that a champion would willingly choose a human over the Empire. It is smart, Elias admitted, though the word tasted like bile. It makes you a victim to be saved, and me a monster to be put down. It gives everyone permission to kill me without guilt. We need the truth, Kalen said. Now more than ever. The Archive of Ancestors was a fortress of silence amidst the noise of the city. It was a massive, windowless cube of black stone floating above the central plaza, held in place by powerful anti-gravity tethers. Inside, gravity was subjective. The floor shifted and rotated, allowing the librarians to access billions of data crystals stored in the honeycomb walls. They infiltrated through a waste disposal chute, a glamorous recurring theme in their partnership that Elias noted with dry sarcasm. Inside, the air was cold and smelled of ozone and old paper. Kalen navigated the shifting gravity with ease, her magnetic boots locking onto the floating walkways. Elias stumbled behind her, clutching the railing as the floor beneath him tilted 90 degrees, turning the wall into a ceiling. The terminal is there. Kalen pointed to a glowing console suspended in the center of the void. It is the node for the pre-war history. Elias hooked his portable decoder into the console. His fingers flew across the holographic keys, bypassing the civilian firewalls. I am looking for the mate protocol, Elias said. That is what the data shard referenced. If we can find the origin of the program, we can find the encryption key for the tri-seal. He pulled up the file. A stream of data cascaded through the air, projecting images of DNA helixes and brain scans. Here it is, Elias said. Project Clementine, authorized 300 years ago. He began to read, and as he did, the blood drained from his face. What is it? Kalen asked, watching the perimeter. Elias didn't answer. He expanded the hologram. It showed a Valkyrie genome being spliced with foreign genetic markers. It showed charts of hormonal triggers and pheromone response simulations. This is not just a political program, Elias said, his voice trembling. Kalen, this is biological engineering. Kaylin stepped closer, her eyes scanning the floating text. The High Command realized that pure loyalty was unstable. Elias read, "Soldiers could defect, alliances could break." So they created the mate protocol. They introduced a dormant gene sequence into the warrior caste, a synthetic instinct. He looked at her, his eyes full of sorrow. It is designed to trigger a bond with specific species that possess high strategic value. Humans, Rhodians, the Killian trade lords. It simulates the chemical rush of ancient soul binding. But it is artificial. It is a leash. Kaylin stared at the data. She saw the schematics for the chemical trigger, the exact rush of heat she had felt on the station, the exact pull she felt toward Elias right now. It is a weapon?" she whispered. "It is a control mechanism," Elias said. "They use it to secure alliances. They bond a champion to a foreign leader, and suddenly that leader is family. They can't attack Varos without hurting their own mate. And the champion will do anything to protect the mate, even betray their own people." Kaylin staggered back, her back hitting the railing. The glow of her tattoos flickered and dimmed. "So it is not real," she said, her voice cracking. "What I feel. The pull. The need to protect you. It is just code? It is just a program running in my blood?" She looked at her hands as if they were foreign objects. "I thought I made a choice," she whispered. "I thought, for the first time in my life, I chose something for myself. But I was just following a different set of orders." The devastation on her face was total. The propaganda outside said she was mind-controlled by a thief. The truth inside said she was mind-controlled by her own biology. Either way, she was a puppet. Kaylin turned away, her shoulders shaking. "We should leave," she said, her voice dead. "There is no point. I am defective." Elias unhooked from the console. He walked over to her, navigating the shifting gravity until he stood directly in her path. "Stop," he said. "Get out of my way. Elias," she warned. "I am a weapon. I am a trap designed to catch you." He grabbed her shoulders. She stiffened, but she didn't throw him off. "Listen to me," Elias said firmly. "Maybe they wrote the code. Maybe they pushed the first domino 300 years ago. Maybe the chemical rush is engineered." He stepped closer, forcing her to look at him. "But the chemicals didn't make you jump in front of that blade. The chemicals didn't make you refuse to kill the innocent on that moon. The chemicals didn't make you laugh at my stupid joke in the cargo hold." He took her hand and placed it on his chest, right over his heart. "They can build the engine, Kaylin. But you are the one driving the car. You are the one choosing what to do with the feeling. Is the fear fake? Is the trust fake?" Kaylin looked at him. She felt the warmth of his skin through her glove. She felt the steady, stubborn beat of his heart. "I do not know what is real anymore," she whispered. "Then look at me," Elias said. "I do not have the protocol. I am just a guy from a junk station. And I am telling you, I am not standing here because of a gene splice. I am standing here because you are the most incredible thing I have ever seen." Kaylin let out a shuddering breath. The despair didn't vanish, but it receded, replaced by a fragile resolve. "You are good at speeches, human," she said softly. "I am good at salvage," Elias corrected. "I know how to find the value in things that other people think are broken." He squeezed her hand. "We have the location of the Tri-Seal key. It is in the Arena of Whispers. The High Matron is wearing it as a ceremonial medallion during the Victory Games." Kaylin straightened up. The warrior mask slid back into place, but her eyes remained human, vulnerable. "Then we go to the arena," she said, "and we take it back." The Arena of Whispers was a coliseum of black glass, seating 100,000 spectators. The roar of the crowd was a physical force, shaking the very foundations of the structure. In the center, the sand was stained with the blue and red blood of the afternoon's games. The plan was madness. Kalen would enter the melee as a masked challenger, creating a distraction. Elias would splice into the arena's drone network, using the chaos to isolate the High Matron's podium and steal the digital signature of the key remotely. Kalen stood in the holding pen, wearing a generic gladiator's helm. She checked the weight of her dual blades. "Do not die." Elias's voice crackled in her earpiece. "Focus on the hack," Kalen replied. "I will handle the violence." The gates opened. Kalen stepped out into the blinding ashlight of the arena. The announcer's voice boomed. "A challenger approaches! A nameless warrior seeks glory!" The crowd roared. 3 armored beasts, cybernetic tigers with plasma claws, were released from the opposite gate. Kalen moved. It was not a fight. It was a dance of geometry and physics. She flowed under the first beast's pounce, her blade severing the hydraulic line of its leg. She vaulted off the back of the second, spinning in midair to deliver a stunning kick to the third. She fought with breathtaking precision, a whirlwind of steel and discipline, up in the nosebleed section, huddled under a maintenance tarp. Elias watched the fight with his heart in his throat. His fingers flew across his datapad. "I am in the drone network," he muttered, triangulating the matron's position. He accessed the camera feed of the royal box. The High Matron sat there, ancient and terrifying, the tri-seal key hanging around her neck, a glowing crystal pendant. "I need a clear line of sight for the scanner," Elias said. "Kalen, move the fight to the center pillar." Kalen heard him. She parried a claw swipe that would have taken her head off, then baited the remaining beast toward the central spire of the arena. She backflipped onto the raised platform, striking a pose that drew every eye and every camera drone toward her. "Now," Elias hissed. He piggybacked the signal on a hovering camera drone, zooming in on the matron's pendant. The scanner bar on his screen began to fill. 70%, 80. Down in the sand, Kalen was holding off the beasts, but she wasn't killing them. She was disabling them. She refused to take a life for the crowd's entertainment. "Finish it!" the crowd screamed. "Blood! Blood!" Kalen hesitated. One of the beasts recovered, lunging for her throat. She slammed the pommel of her blade into its snout, knocking it unconscious. 95. "Got it?" Elias cheered. He initiated the broadcast. He patched the decoded footage from the shard, the proof of the false flag wars, the mate protocol, the ashlight harvesting, into the massive jumbotrons that circled the arena. "Look at the truth," Elias yelled, hitting execute. The giant screens flickered. The image of the beast fight vanished, replaced by the shaky footage of the war room. "Kill the envoy." The recorded voice of the matron echoed through the stadium. The crowd went silent. The fighting in the arena stopped. Even the beasts seemed to pause. Then, the screen glitched. The audio warped. The image distorted, pixelating into static. A second later, the feed was overridden. The face of Commander Vora appeared, crisp and high definition. "Citizens!" Vora shouted. "The mind thief is attacking our sacred network. He is trying to poison your eyes with deep fakes." The footage on the screen changed. It showed a generated video of Elias laughing maniacally, holding a device labeled Valkyrie Subjugation Tool. "Do not look," Vora commanded. "It is a virus. Security. Execute the challenger. She is his puppet." The crowd's confusion turned instantly to rage. They began to hurl debris into the arena. "He is lying," Elias screamed at his screen, but he was locked out. The High Command's cyber warfare suite was too strong. They had been ready for this. Kalen, get out of there! Elias shouted into the comms. The arena guards were pouring onto the sand, weapons raised. Kalen looked up at the matron's box. The matron was smiling, a cold, thin expression of absolute victory. Kalen threw a flash grenade at her feet. A blinding white light filled the arena. When it cleared, she was gone, having slipped into the drainage grates beneath the sand. They met in the Undercity, miles below the shining spires. Here, the air tasted of burnt lightning and sorrow. This was where the ashlight was refined. Massive factories churned day and night, processing the stolen energy. The workers here were hollow-eyed, their skin gray from radiation exposure. Elias and Kalen took shelter in a disused maintenance shed near a coolant river. Kalen ripped off her gladiator helm and threw it against the wall. It clanged loudly in the small space. "We failed," she said, pacing the room like a caged animal. "They turned it against us. The people believe the lie. They want to believe the lie." "It is easier than admitting they are monsters," Elias said quietly. He was sitting on a crate, exhaustion seeping into his bones. He watched her. She was vibrating with adrenaline and frustration. Her armor scuffed, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. She looked magnificent and terrifying. Kalen stopped pacing. She looked at him. The bond was surging again, fueled by the danger, the near-death escape, and the raw intensity of the moment. "Why are you still here?" she asked. "You have the key data now. You could take a shuttle. You could run to the human colonies." "I am not leaving you," Elias said. "Why?" she demanded, stepping closer. "Because of the protocol? Because of the biology?" "No," Elias said. He stood up, closing the distance between them. "Because you are the only person in this galaxy who makes sense to me." Kalen froze. The anger drained out of her face, replaced by a naked longing that she was too tired to hide. "Elias," she whispered. "I know," he said. "I know you are scared that it is not real. I know you are scared that you are programmed to want this." He reached out, his hands hovering just inches from her waist. He didn't touch her. He waited. He offered her the space to close the gap. "But I am telling you," Elias whispered. "I am choosing this right now. No program, no codes, just me. I want you. Not the champion, not the shield. You." Kalen looked at his hands. Then she looked at his eyes. She stepped forward, closing the inch of space. She pressed her body against his, the hard ceramic of her armor meeting the soft fabric of his flight suit. "I want you too," she said, her voice fierce. "And I am terrified." She took his face in her hands. Her skin was rough, calloused from years of wielding a blade. "Prove it is real," she whispered. She kissed him. It wasn't a tentative movie screen kiss. It was a collision. It was desperate and hungry, tasting of adrenaline and fear. Elias wrapped his arms around her, pulling her closer, anchoring her against the storm of the world outside. The bond flared white-hot in his mind, a torrent of shared sensation. But for the first time, he didn't care where the chemistry ended and the soul began. It felt like coming home. They broke apart, gasping for air, foreheads pressed together. "Okay," Elias breathed. That felt real. Kalen let out a short, breathless laugh. Yes, it did. The heavy iron door of the shed groaned and swung open. Elias and Kalen spun around, weapons drawn in a heartbeat. Standing in the doorway was a figure cloaked in tattered red silk. She lowered her hood, revealing a face that was lined with age and etched with bitterness. Her eyes were milky white, blind. She was a priestess, one of the holy caste, but her robes were torn, and she wore the iron collar of a disgraced exile. Put the weapons down. Children, the woman rasped. Her voice sounded like dry leaves scraping on stone. Who are you? Kaelin demanded, positioning herself in front of Elias. I am High Priestess Ilara, the woman said. Or I was, before I saw what they were doing in the dark. She stepped into the room, leaning on a twisted staff. I heard the broadcast before they cut it, the priestess said. I saw the flash of truth, and I know where you need to go next. She looked blindly toward Kaelin. You are struggling with the protocol, daughter. You wonder if you are a fake. How do you know that? Kaelin asked sharply. Because I helped write the code, Ilara said. The silence in the room was absolute. But know this, the priestess continued, tapping her chest. We can program the body to react. We can program the heart to race. But we could never program the will to sacrifice. That child is entirely your own. She turned her sightless eyes toward the door. Identity is not what the High Command brands you with. It is not what your genetics dictate. It is what you choose when the knife is at your throat. And right now, the knife is at the throat of the world. She banged her staff on the floor. Are you done kissing? Good. Because we have a superweapon to disable, and I am the only one who knows the back door into the temple. The air in the maintenance shed was heavy with the smell of recycled coolant and the sharp, ozone tang of anxiety. High Priestess Ilara stood before a holographic map of the capital, her milky, sightless eyes seemingly fixed on the pulsing red node in the center of the projection. You think they harvest the ashlight just to power the cities? Ilara asked, her voice dry as parchment. You think they strip entire worlds of their magnetic shields just so we can have brighter streetlights and faster ships? Elias sat on a crate, watching the old woman. Kaelin stood by the door, her hand resting on the hilt of her blade, her body tense. They told us it was for the fleet, Kaelin said, to maintain the perimeter. Lies, Ilara spat. She tapped the floor with her staff. Beneath the temple fortress, deep in the bedrock, lies the World Eater. It is an ancient terraforming engine we dug up 1,000 years ago. It does not just burn energy, it projects it. It is a sterilization array. Elias felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Sterilization? Elias asked. It wipes biospheres clean, Ilara said. It targets organic matter with specific resonance frequencies. It leaves the cities, the factories, and the resources intact. But it turns the population into dust. That is what the ashlight is for. It is ammunition. Kaelin looked ill. Her armor, usually a symbol of her strength, seemed to weigh her down. They are going to use it? Kaelin whispered. They are preparing a test fire, Ilara said. On the rebellious moon colony of Cora 7, if they succeed, no world will ever defy the High Command again. We have to stop it, Elias said, standing up. To stop it, you need the Prime Ledger, Ilara said. It is the hard copy record of every order given by the High Matron. It is kept in the weapon chamber itself. It is the only proof that cannot be digitally altered by their propaganda machines. It is a suicide mission, Kaelin said flatly. The temple fortress is the most heavily guarded structure on the planet. Ilara smiled, a grim, toothless expression. Tonight is the rite of ascension. The temple will be flooded with thousands of masked pilgrims. The sensors will be overwhelmed. If you can move like a shadow, you can walk right to the heart of the beast, before they could finalize the plan. Kaelin's personal comms unit beeped. It was a secure, high-priority frequency. She stared at it, her face paling. It is General Torian, she said. Torian? Elias asked. My mentor, Kaelin said. The man who taught me how to hold a sword. She accepted the transmission. A hologram of an older Valkyrie warrior appeared. He had a face like carved granite, scarred and weary. "Kalen," Torian said. His voice was not angry. It was sad. "General," Kalen replied, her posture automatically snapping to attention. "I know where you are." "Kalen," Torian said, "I know you are confused. I know the human has twisted your mind, but it is not too late. Bring him to the North Gate. Surrender him. The matron has authorized a full pardon. You will be cleansed. You will be restored as High Champion." Kalen hesitated. The offer was everything she had been trained to want. Redemption. Home. "And Elias?" she asked. "He will be treated fairly," Torian promised. "He will be processed according to the law." Kalen looked at Elias. The bond between them hummed, a low note of warning. "I need time," Kalen said. "You have 1 hour," Torian replied. "Then the hunt begins in earnest." The hologram faded. Kalen looked at Alara, then at Elias. "He is a man of honor," she said. "If he gave his word." "He is a man of the system," Ilara interrupted. Elias was already typing furiously on his datapad, accessing the station's legal database he had downloaded earlier. "Processed according to the law," Elias muttered. He scrolled through the Valkyrie legal codex. Here it is. Subsection 49. He turned the screen toward Kalen. "If a bond is legally recognized but one partner is deemed a non-citizen threat, the state has the right to seize the non-citizen as mate property." "Mate property?" Kalen asked. "It means I do not go to prison," Elias said, his voice grim. "It means I become a biological asset. They do not want to execute me, Kalen. They want to vivisect me. They want to crack open my skull and see how the bond works so they can replicate it. They want the encryption key in my head." Kalen's face hardened into stone. The longing for home vanished, replaced by the cold fury of a protector. "It is a trap," she said. "So we spring it," Elias said. "We use the meeting at the North Gate as a diversion. While Torian waits for us there, we go in through the South Pilgrimage route." The temple fortress was a mountain of obsidian that pierced the clouds. Tonight, it was a hive of silent motion. The rite of ascension was a ceremony of visual worship. Sound was forbidden. Kalen and Elias, dressed in the heavy hooded robes of the penitent caste, moved with the sea of bodies flowing into the massive archway. Every pilgrim wore a porcelain mask, featureless and white. Elias adjusted his own mask, breathing in the scent of incense and fear. Inside, the spectacle was overwhelming. The great hall was a cavern large enough to hold a starship. The floor was transparent glass, beneath which pulsed rivers of raw ashlight, bathing the chamber in a throbbing violet glow. 10,000 pilgrims stood in perfect concentric circles. On a raised dais, the priesthood performed the rituals. They moved in perfect synchronization, raising diamond-edged blades to the light, then bringing them down in a silent salute. "Do not break step," Kalen's voice whispered in his earpiece. They moved toward the side alcoves, aiming for the service lifts that led down to the weapon core. The silence was heavy, pressing against Elias's eardrums. The only sound was the rhythmic thrum of the ashlight beneath their feet. A drone hovered past them, its scanner sweeping the crowd. Elias held his breath. The drone paused, its red eye fixing on him. His heart rate spiked. "It knows," Elias thought. The drone dipped lower. Suddenly a hand clamped onto his shoulder. It wasn't Kalen. A temple guard, silent and massive, had stepped out of the shadows. He did not speak. He simply raised a shock lance, the tip crackling with lethal voltage, and thrust it toward Elias's chest. There was no time to think. There was no time to plan. Kalen moved. She did not draw a weapon. That would have alerted the entire hall. Instead, she threw her body across the gap, intercepting the strike. The lance hit her in the shoulder. The sound of the discharge was a wet, heavy crack that echoed through the silent hall like a gunshot. Kaylin convulsed, her nervous system lighting up as the voltage surged through her armor. She didn't scream. She bit through her lip, blood filling her mouth, and slammed her elbow into the guard's throat, crushing his windpipe. He dropped silently. She grabbed Elias with her good arm, her grip bruising. "Go!" she hissed, her voice slurring. Panic rippled through the nearby pilgrims. The silence broke. They slipped into the service corridor just as the alarms began to wail. Kaylin dragged them into a small medical alcove, locking the door behind them. She collapsed against the wall, sliding down to the floor. Her left arm hung uselessly at her side, smoke rising from the scorched armor plate. Her breathing was ragged and shallow. "Kaylin." Elias dropped to his knees beside her. He ripped the medical kit from his belt. The shock overloaded the neuromesh. Kaylin gasped, her eyes unfocused. I cannot feel my legs." "Let me help," Elias said, his hands shaking as he fumbled with the stim injector. "No!" Kaylin shoved him away with her good hand. It was a weak shove, but the intent was fierce. "Get away from me! I am compromised! I am a liability!" "Stop it," Elias said, grabbing her hand. "Leave me!" Kaylin shouted, tears cutting tracks through the grime on her face. "You have to get the ledger. I can't protect you like this. I am broken. Elias, I am just meat in a can. Go!" Elias stared at her. He saw the terror in her eyes, not terror of dying, but terror of being weak, of being useless. He didn't leave. He moved closer. He injected the stim directly into her neck. "I am not going anywhere," Elias said softly. Kaylin sobbed, a harsh, jagged sound. "I have never been allowed to be soft," she whispered, her voice trembling. "If you are soft, you die. If you are soft, you are culled. I am a champion. I am supposed to be iron." Elias reached out and brushed the hair back from her sweaty forehead. "Iron rusts, Kaylin," he said. "Iron breaks." He looked deep into her luminous, terrified eyes. "You think softness is a weakness? It is the only thing that proves you are still alive inside that machine they built around you. The fact that you can feel pain, that you can fear for me. That is your strength. That is why you are going to win, because you are fighting for something other than a quota." Kaylin stared at him. The stim was kicking in, clarity returning to her gaze. She looked at his hand resting on her cheek. She leaned into it, just for a second, closing her eyes. "You are a stubborn fool," she whispered. "I learned from the best," Elias replied. She took a deep breath and nodded. "Help me up." The weapon chamber was a cathedral of death. It was a vast spherical hollow carved out of the planet's crust. Suspended in the center was the weapon, a colossal lattice of alien metal, twisting and turning in geometries that hurt the eyes to look at. It hummed like a sleeping god, a deep, resonant vibration that rattled the bones. Thick pipelines of glowing violet ashlight fed into it from the walls, pulsating like veins. "There." Kaylin pointed, the control platform. They crossed the suspension bridge, the air around them crackling with static. On the central console lay a massive book bound in a material that looked like woven glass. The Prime Ledger. Elias opened it. He scanned the pages with his decoder. "This is it," he said. "The records of every harvest, every order." He stopped, his finger freezing on a line of text. "Oh no," he whispered. "What is it?" Kaylin asked, guarding the bridge. "The authorization for the first false flag attack." Elias said, "The one that started the war." It wasn't just the matron. He looked up, his face pale. It was co-signed by the Terran Stellar Corporation. Kalen frowned. Humans? Yes, Elias said, his voice bitter. The reconstruction contracts, the weapon sales. Human corporations paid the matron to start the war so they could sell weapons to both sides and then rebuild the colonies that got destroyed. It is a partnership. Kalen looked at the weapon, then at the book. We are not just fighting my people, she said softly. We are fighting everyone. Slow clap echoed from the shadows. It is a very profitable partnership, a voice said. Commander Vora stepped out from behind a support strut. She was not wearing her helmet. Her face was beautiful and cold, but her eyes looked tired. She held a heavy plasma pistol leveled at Elias. Vora, Kalen said, stepping in front of Elias. You look terrible. Kalen, Vora said, eyeing the scorched armor. But you look alive. Step aside. Vora, Kalen warned. The ledger proves everything. I know what it proves, Vora said. I have read it. You know? Elias asked. And you still serve them? Vora laughed, a bitter, sharp sound. She reached up and pulled the collar of her armor down. On her neck, right where the bond mark would be, was a thick, angry scar. A brand. I didn't get a choice, Vora said quietly. I was bonded to a trade minister when I was 20, a political arrangement to secure a shipping lane. I hated him. I hated the chemical leash in my blood that made me sick when I was away from him. She looked at Kalen with pure, unadulterated envy. When he died, I thought I was free. But the High Command just reassigned me. I serve because they hold the antidote to the withdrawal symptoms. She raised the gun. You broke the chain. Kalen, you chose astray. You chose chaos, and I hate you for it, because you were brave enough to do what I couldn't. Vora fired. Kalen moved instantly, her shield flaring as she deflected the bolt. Get the ledger to the uplink, Kalen shouted to Elias. She charged Vora. The fight was a blur of motion on the narrow suspension bridge. Vora was fresh, fast, and ruthless. Kalen was injured, slower, but fighting with a desperate ferocity. Vora swung a vibro blade, aiming for Kalen's wounded shoulder. Kalen ducked, the blade shearing off a lock of her hair. She countered with a sweep of her staff, knocking Vora off balance. They traded blows, sparks raining down into the ashlight core below. You are a traitor, Vora screamed, striking Kalen across the face. I am free, Kalen roared back. She caught Vora's wrist, twisting it until the blade dropped. With a surge of strength powered by the adrenaline of the bond, Kalen slammed Vora against the railing. Kalen held her staff to Vora's throat. Vora froze, panting, her eyes wide. Do it, Vora hissed. Kill me. Prove you are a monster. Kalen looked at her. She saw the scar on Vora's neck. She saw the trap she was in. No, Kalen said. She pulled the staff back. I am not the matron, Kalen said. I do not kill for convenience. Vora stared at her, stunned. Why? She whispered. Because the chain only breaks if we stop acting like lynx, Kalen said. She turned her back on Vora, a fatal mistake in any other circumstance, but a deliberate act of defiance now. She ran to Elias. Upload complete, Elias yelled. I have sent the ledger data to every colony relay in the sector. The alarm klaxons turned from a wail to a deafening screech. Security breach. The automated voice boomed. Lockdown initiated and we have to go. Kalen grabbed Elias. They sprinted for the exit. Behind them, Vora stood on the bridge, watching them run. She looked at her pistol. She looked at the retreating figures. She did not fire. The escape was a nightmare of speed. They stole a gravity sled from the maintenance bay and blasted out into the city. The sky above Oakvar was lit up with holographic screens. But they weren't showing the ledger. Not yet. They were showing the matron's face. "Citizens!" the matron screamed, her composure cracking. "The bond claim is illegal. The human is a parasite. The ancient law is suspended. The city was in chaos." Security skiffs swarmed the air like angry wasps. Elias drove the sled, weaving through the spires, banking hard around the glowing banners. "They are trying to revoke the law," Elias shouted over the wind. "Let them try," Kaylin shouted back, firing her pistol at a pursuing drone. She looked down at the streets below. Crowds were gathering. They weren't dispersing. They were watching the screens, where fragments of the ledger were finally starting to break through the firewall, flickering in between the matron's screams. "They see it," Kaylin said, a fierce grin breaking across her face. They see the fear in her eyes. Elias swerved the sled into a dive, heading for the lower atmosphere. "Systems stay corrupt because everyone believes resistance is pointless," Elias yelled. Kaylin looked back at the temple fortress, shrinking in the distance. "We just proved it has a point," she said. One public act of courage, Elias thought as he punched the accelerator. That was all it took. The myth of Valkyrie invincibility had cracked, and now the whole world was going to watch it shatter. The safe house was a hollowed-out ventilation turbine deep in the industrial sector, where the air hummed with the subsonic vibration of the city's power grid. It was not comfortable, but it was defensible. For the last 20 hours, it had also been a classroom. "Again," Kaylin said, her voice sharp. Elias groaned, picking himself up from the metal grating. He rubbed his shoulder where she had checked him, sending him sprawling. "I am a mechanic," Elias wheezed. "I fix engines. I do not wrestle super soldiers." "You are a target," Kaylin corrected. She stood in the center of the room, her armor stripped down to the undersuit, revealing the network of scar lines that pulsed with a faint, agitated light. "If you cannot dodge a sweep kick, you will not survive the convergence hall." She moved toward him. It was not an attack. It was a lesson in physics. She grabbed his wrist. "You are trying to overpower me," she said, adjusting his stance with a tap of her boot against his ankle. "You cannot. I am denser than you. My muscle fibers are reinforced with carbon weave. If you fight my strength, I will break you." "So what do I do?" Elias asked, looking at her hand on his wrist. "You cheat," Kaylin said. She twisted his arm. Instead of resisting, Elias remembered what she had told him an hour ago. He stepped into the motion, closing the distance, and used his free hand to slap the pressure point on her elbow. Kaylin's grip faltered for a microsecond. Elias didn't wait. He dropped his weight, spinning under her guard, and scrambled away to the other side of the room. "Better," Kaylin admitted, a flicker of approval in her eyes. "But you hesitated." "I didn't want to hurt you," Elias said. Kaylin looked at him, and for a moment, the drill sergeant persona slipped. "You cannot hurt me, Elias," she said softly. "But your hesitation will get you killed. And if you die—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The bond interface hummed between them, carrying the rest of the thought like a physical weight. "If you die, I will tear this city apart until they put me down." It was becoming harder to tell where he ended and she began. The bond was stabilizing, shifting from a chaotic noise into a high-bandwidth connection. When Kaylin moved, Elias felt the ghostly echo of her muscles contracting in his own limbs. When Elias noticed a flickering light on a control panel, Kaylin's head snapped toward it before he said a word. It was useful, terrifyingly so, but it was also overwhelming. "Take a break," Elias said. He walked over to their small pile of supplies and tossed her a nutrient bar. She caught it without looking, her eyes still tracking the perimeter sensors. We have 6 hours until the convergence begins, she said, tearing the wrapper with her teeth. Elias sat on a crate, watching her. He saw the tension in her jaw, the way her shoulders were locked high. "Sit down, Kaylin," he said. She hesitated, then sat on the floor opposite him. The room was cold, lit only by the blue glow of the turbine's status lights. Elias moved off the crate and sat beside her. He picked up a rag and a tin of polishing compound. He reached for her discarded chest plate, which was scored with carbon burns from their escape. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Maintenance," Elias said. He dipped the rag in the tin and began to work on the armor. "You take care of the tactical strategy. I take care of the gear. That is the deal." Kaylin watched his hands. The rhythmic motion of the polishing was soothing. She could feel his focus through the bond, a quiet, steady hum that counteracted her own jagged anxiety. "You are strange," she murmured. "Why?" Elias asked, not looking up. "You are holding the armor of a high champion," she said. "That plate has deflected rounds that would vaporize a tank. It is a symbol of everything your people hate, and you are cleaning it like it is a piece of fine china." "It is not a symbol," Elias said. He looked at her, his expression open and honest. "It is the thing that keeps you safe, so I am going to make sure it is perfect." Kaylin felt a lump form in her throat. She wasn't used to this. In the war temples, care was transactional. You maintained your weapon because a broken weapon was a failure. You fed your body because a starving soldier was useless. But this quiet, unasked-for service felt different. It felt like home. She reached out and placed her hand over his, stopping the motion. Elias looked at her. "Can I?" she whispered. It was a question of boundaries. The bond made them vulnerable to each other's emotions. But they had established a rule. Physical touch required explicit verbal consent. "Yes," Elias said. She interlaced her fingers with his. Her skin was rough, calloused and hot. His was cooler, softer but scarred from years of salvage work. The connection flared. For a second, Elias saw himself through her eyes, small, fragile, but blazing with a stubborn, reckless light. And Kaylin saw herself through his, not a weapon, not a monster, but a woman made of gold and iron, worthy of being held. The intensity was frightening. "We are going to change everything today," Elias said, his voice low. "Or we are going to die," Kaylin said. "Probably both." Elias smiled. "That is the trick." He squeezed her hand. "Now, teach me that disarming move again, the one where I cheat." Kaylin laughed, a soft sound that bounced off the metal walls. "Stand up, bond attendant." The convergence hall was the heart of the Valkyrie political machine. It was a massive amphitheater located at the apex of the central spire, open to the sky and surrounded by mirrored pillars that reflected the crimson storm clouds above. The security perimeter was absolute. Force fields, drone swarms, and 2 battalions of the Immortal Guard blocked every approach. Elias and Kaylin lay prone on a rooftop 500 meters away, observing the checkpoint through a thermal scope. "There is no way through," Kaylin said, her voice tight. "The thermal scanners will pick up our body heat. The bond signature will flare on their sensors like a beacon." "We have to create a distraction," Elias said. "Maybe I can hack the traffic control grid, crash a few skiffs. It will not be enough," Kaylin said. "They will lock down the gate. We need a clearance code." A shadow fell over them. Kaylin rolled onto her back, her sidearm clearing the holster in a blur of motion. "Don't," a voice said. Commander Vora stood behind them. She was not wearing her helmet. Her silver armor reflected the city lights. She held her hands up. "Empty. Vora," Kaelin hissed, keeping the gun leveled at her chest. You are terrible at stealth. Kaelin, Vora said, her tone bored. The perimeter sensors picked you up 10 minutes ago. Then why aren't we dead? Elias asked, peeking over the parapet. Because I deleted the log, Vora said. She tapped a command into her wrist comp. The force field at the service entrance of the convergence hall flickered and dropped. You have a 3-minute window before the cycle resets, Vora said. Kaelin lowered the gun slowly. She stood up, looking at her rival. The wind whipped Vora's hair across her face, hiding the scar on her neck. But Kaelin knew it was there. Why? Kaelin asked. Vora looked at the hall, where the flags of the High Command snapped in the wind. Because you were right, she said quietly. I am tired of being a link in the chain. She looked back at Kaelin, her eyes hard. Do not mistake this for friendship. Champion, if you fail today, I will lead the squad that hunts you down. I am giving you a chance to speak. What happens after that is up to the gods. Vora turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the roof access. She is terrifying, Elias whispered. She is Valkyrie, Kaelin said, a note of pride in her voice. Come on, 3 minutes. They moved. The convergence hall was a sea of noise. Thousands of delegates, senators, warlords, high priests, and corporate liaisons filled the tiered benches. In the center, on a floating dais of obsidian, sat the High Matron. She looked small from a distance, buried under layers of ceremonial silk, but her presence filled the room like a noxious gas. Drones hovered everywhere, broadcasting the assembly to the entire planet and the colonies beyond. Elias and Kaelin, disguised in the stolen robes of the servant caste, moved through the lower levels. They carried a tray of ceremonial wine, heads bowed. We need to get to the central projection node, Elias whispered. It is right under the dais. They reached the base of the platform. A guard stepped in front of them. Halt, the guard said. No service during the address. Elias looked at the guard. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't have a plan B. He just had the improvisation lesson Kaelin had drilled into him. He tripped. It was a spectacular flailing stumble. The tray of wine went flying, splashing dark purple liquid all over the guard's pristine white armor. You clumsy fool, the guard roared, distracted, in that second of chaos. Kaelin moved. She didn't kill him. She stepped into his blind spot, drove her knuckles into the nerve cluster at the base of his neck, and caught him as he folded. She dragged him into the shadows. Go, she said to Elias. Elias scrambled up the maintenance ladder, jacking his portable decoder into the main projection hub. Above him, the matron was speaking. The rumors of dissent are lies. The matron's voice boomed. The ashlight harvest is a holy necessity. The humans are parasites who seek to weaken our resolve. Elias's fingers flew across the holographic keys. Override in 3, 2, 1. He hit enter. The massive holographic banners floating above the hall flickered. The matron's face vanished. In its place, the prime ledger appeared. Columns of data scrolled down the air, 50 meters high. Dates, casualties, false flag orders, the signature of the Terran Stellar Corporation next to the matron's seal. The hall went silent. Then, a murmur started, low and angry, like a gathering storm. Elias climbed up onto the dais, shedding his servant's robe. He stood there, a small human figure in a flight suit, surrounded by giants. Look at it, Elias shouted, his voice amplified by the hacked system. Look at what they bought with your blood. The matron stood up. She did not look afraid. She looked annoyed. Cut the feed, she ordered. It is hard-coded. Matron, a technician yelled from the pit. We cannot stop it. The matron looked at Elias. She smiled, a thin reptilian expression. You think truth is enough, little human? She asked, her voice calm. You think these people care about data? They care about survival. She tapped a rune on her throne. Attention. The matron's voice cut through the murmur. Since our enemies wish to reveal secrets, let us reveal the full power of the Valkyrie state. A new hologram appeared next to the ledger. It showed a live feed of the moon colony Cora 7. It was a rebellious world, home to millions of refugees. Above the moon, the clouds were parting. A beam of violet light, thick as a city, was gathering in the upper atmosphere. The World Eater, Kalen whispered, stepping up onto the dais beside Elias. Initiate Stage 1, the matron commanded. The beam fired. It didn't destroy the planet. It hit the northern continent. On the screen, the green forests turned instantly to gray ash. The ocean boiled. The sensors scrolled a casualty count. 400,000 dead in 3 seconds. The crowd in the hall gasped. Some cheered, the die-hard loyalists. Others screamed in horror. This is the price of treason, the matron declared. The weapon is targeted on the main settlement. 3 million lives. I will fire again in 1 minute unless the traitor Kalen surrenders and the human is executed. She looked at the crowd. Who among you wants to be responsible for 3 million deaths? Seize them. The mood in the hall shifted instantly. The senators and warlords turned toward the dais, drawing ceremonial daggers and sidearms. Fear was a powerful motivator, and the matron played it like a harp. Elias backed up, hitting Kalen's shoulder. She is bluffing, Elias said, though his voice shook. She needs the colony for labor. She is not bluffing, Kalen said. She will burn it all down to keep the throne. The security forces surged forward. The Immortal Guard, huge warriors in black armor, began to climb the dais. Kalen stepped in front of Elias. She ripped off the servant's robe, revealing her battle-damaged armor, the gold filigree scorched but still shining. She extended her energy staff, the blade snapping into existence with a hum that vibrated in everyone's teeth. She didn't shout. She didn't assume a combat stance. She just stood there, a wall between the mob and the man. Stop, she commanded. The authority in her voice, the voice of a high champion, halted the front row of guards. You call me a traitor, Kalen said, her voice amplified by the drone network. You say I was seduced. You say I am mind-controlled. She looked at the matron. Then she looked at the camera drones. I am Kalen of the Third Fleet. I have burned worlds for you. I have bled for you. And I tell you now, the only time I was ever mind-controlled was when I followed your orders. She reached back and took Elias's hand. She lifted it up, showing the joined hands to the assembly. This man is not my master. He is not my pet. She took a deep breath, and the scar lines on her neck flared with a blinding white light, not the pink of the artificial protocol, but the pure, searing white of a soul-deep conviction. He is my mate, she roared. The words echoed off the mirrored pillars. It wasn't a legal claim this time. It wasn't a tactic to stop a blade. It was a vow. It was a rejection of the biology they had engineered and an acceptance of the love they had forbidden. The crowd fractured. A warlord in the front row, a veteran of the border wars, sheathed his dagger. He looked at the matron, then at Kalen. He knelt. The ancient law holds, he shouted. Traitor, a senator screamed, firing a blaster at the warlord. The hall erupted. It was total chaos. Loyalists turned on waverers. The Immortal Guard charged the dais. Plasma fire crisscrossed the air like angry fireflies. Protect the node, Kalen yelled. She became a blur. She spun her staff, deflecting a hail of bolts. She kicked a guard off the platform, used the momentum to slash through the rifle of a second, and slammed the blunt end of her staff into the helmet of a third. Elias was behind her, ducking under the console. He wasn't hiding. He was working. "I need to shut down the weapon," he yelled over the noise of the battle. He hacked into the firing control. The screen flashed red. Access denied. Biosignature mismatch. "What does it say?" Kalen shouted, parrying a vibroblade strike. "It is locked," Elias yelled. The matron built a failsafe. The shutdown command requires 2 biosignatures, a high-ranking Valkyrie and what? "And a bonded partner," Elias said, staring at the screen. She designed it so only she and her corporate puppets could control it together. "It requires a synchronized neural input." Kalen kicked a guard in the chest, sending him flying into the crowd. She dropped back to Elias's side. "We are a bonded partner," she said. "Not fully." Elias said, "We are linked, but this requires a deep dive sync. We have to merge our neural patterns to override the lock." He looked at her, his eyes wide with fear. "Kalen, if we do this..." The feedback loop could be permanent. It fuses memory, sensation, identity. I might not be just Elias anymore. You might not be just Kalen. We could get stuck in the gray. Above them, the weapon charging cycle hit 30 seconds. The beam on the screen intensified. Kalen looked at the screen. She looked at the carnage in the hall. Then she looked at Elias. Her armor was dented. Her face was bleeding. But she had never looked more beautiful. "I do not care about the gray," she said. "I do," Elias said. "I love who you are. I do not want to overwrite you." "You are not overwriting me," Kalen said. She grabbed his face, pulling him close. The battle raged around them, a storm of violence, but in the eye of it, there was only them. "We are choosing to be something new." She looked deep into his eyes. "I give you permission, Elias. I give you everything, my past, my pain, my name. Take it." Elias felt the tears prick his eyes. This was the terrifying part. Not the guns, not the death. The absolute surrender of self. "I give you mine," he whispered. He grabbed her hand and slammed it onto the bioscanner panel next to his. Initiating neural sync, the computer announced. The world went white. It wasn't pain. It was too big for pain. It was a flood. Elias felt the cold wind of the war temples. He felt the crack of the instructor's baton on his ribs. He felt the loneliness of looking at the stars and wondering if he was a monster. He felt Kalen's life, heavy and sharp, crashing into his own. Kalen felt the grit of the scrapyard. She felt the hunger of a child stealing rations. She felt the warmth of Elias's mother reading a book. She felt the humor he used as a shield, the stubbornness he used as an anchor. The boundaries dissolved. There was no his fear or her fear. There was only their fear, and beneath it, their love. It wasn't a soft thing. It was a fusion reaction. It was the energy that created stars. Inside the shared mindscape, they stood together in a void of violet light. Shut it down, they thought, speaking with one voice. In the real world, their bodies seized. The console sparked. The biosignatures merged into a single perfect sine wave. Override accepted. On the massive screen above the dais, the weapon charging bar froze at 99%. Then, it dropped. Weapon deactivated. Systems purging. The violet beam above the moon. Cora 7 flickered and died. The clouds rolled back in. Silence fell over the convergence hall. The fighting stopped. Everyone looked at the screen. Then, they looked at the dais. Elias and Kalen collapsed, still holding hands. Their bodies slumped against the console. They were breathing in unison. The matron screamed. It was a sound of pure, impotent rage. "Kill them! she shrieked. "Kill them all!" But no one moved. The immortal guard lowered their weapons. They looked at the matron, then at the couple on the floor who had just saved 3 million people. "It is over." "Matron." Commander Vora's voice cut through the silence. Vora stood at the entrance of the hall, flanked by a squad of defectors. She walked toward the dais, her boots crunching on the glass. "The ancient law stands," Vora said, "and the weapon is dead." She looked at Elias and Kalen. "Get a medic," she ordered. Elias opened his eyes. The world was blurry. His head felt like it was stuffed with cotton and broken glass. He looked to his side. Kalen was looking at him. Her eyes were different, deeper. They held a knowledge of him that no one else had ever possessed. "Did we win?" Elias croaked. Kalen smiled. It was Elias's smile, crooked and tired. "I think so," she whispered. She squeezed his hand. He felt the squeeze not just on his skin but in his mind, a pulse of reassurance. "I am still me," she thought, the words echoing in his head without being spoken. "I am still me," he thought back. "Mostly," she added, a flicker of amusement dancing across the link. "Mostly," he agreed. They lay there on the cold obsidian, surrounded by the wreckage of an empire, too exhausted to move, but for the first time in the history of two species, completely and utterly undivided. The sink did not feel like a collision. It felt like drowning in a sea of violet glass. Elias Thorne was no longer kneeling on the obsidian dais of the Convergence Hall. He was drifting through a space that had no horizon, suspended in a fluid that tasted of ozone and ancient sorrow. He was not alone. Kalen was there, but she was not the armored warrior standing beside him. She was a presence, a vast and complex network of memories and sensations woven directly into his own neural cortex. He felt the phantom pain of a broken bone he had never suffered, a training injury from her childhood in the war temples. She felt the hollow ache of his hunger from a week spent stranded on a derelict freighter without rations. They were flowing into one another, the boundaries of self eroding under the pressure of the biolink. "Look," Kalen's voice echoed, not in his ears, but in the center of his mind. The violet mist parted. They were looking at a memory that belonged to neither of them. It was data pulled from the deepest core of the weapon's history logs, translated by their joined minds into a visual narrative. They saw a council room, simple and unadorned, carved from gray stone. This was centuries ago. The Valkyrie leaders sitting at the table were not monsters in gilded armor. They were tired, frightened people. A holographic map hovered between them, showing a sector of space blighted by cosmic radiation, crops failing, water turning to dust. "We will starve within 2 generations," a woman said. She wore the robes of the first High Matron. "The ashlight is the only viable energy source," a general replied, "but extracting it kills the host world." "Then we must choose," the matron said, her voice trembling. "It is their worlds or our children. We will tell the people that the outsiders are threats. We will tell them the harvest is a defense. We will make the enemy a necessity so that the atrocity becomes a virtue." The memory dissolved into a kaleidoscope of horrors. Elias and Kalen floated through centuries of orchestrated warfare. They saw the enemy constructed in propaganda reels. They saw fleets burning innocent worlds not because they were dangerous, but because the Valkyrie engine needed fuel. They saw the fear of scarcity twisted into a mandate for genocide. It was never about glory, Elias thought, the realization rippling through the link. It was about fear. Kalen answered. They were just scared, and they built a machine to make sure everyone else was scared too. The realization hit them both with the force of a physical blow. The High Command wasn't a cabal of demons. It was a bureaucracy of cowardice, maintaining a lie because the truth, that they had murdered billions for comfort, was too heavy to bear. Pull the plug, they thought in unison. In the shared mindscape, they reached out. It wasn't a physical motion, it was a rejection of the narrative. They grabbed the spectral cables of the weapon's control system, the violet veins of stolen energy, and they crushed them with the weight of their combined will. The light shattered. Elias gasped, his body jerking as if he had been defibrillated. He was back in the convergence hall. The noise was deafening. The air smelled of ozone and sweat. He was still holding Kaylin's hand, his palm sweating against hers on the console. Above them, the massive screen flickered. The charging bar for the World Eater weapon plummeted from 99% to 0. The violet beam that had been drilling into the atmosphere of the moon, Cora 7, vanished, leaving only a dissipating cloud of ionized gas. A collective sound swept through the hall, not a cheer, but a sob of relief. Millions of people across the system watching on the broadcast exhaled at once. "The weapon is dead," someone shouted from the lower tiers. The High Matron stood on the dais, her chest heaving. She looked at the blank screen, then at the crowd. Her mask of imperial composure fractured, revealing the snarling, desperate tyrant beneath. She pointed a shaking finger at Kaylin and Elias. "They are witches," she screamed, her voice shrill and amplified by the emergency speakers. "Do you see? They used sorcery to silence the machine. The human is a bond witch. He has enslaved the champion with mind plague." The accusation hung in the air. It was ridiculous, but in a society built on rigid order, the inexplicable was often framed as heresy. The Immortal Guard hesitated, their weapons wavering. "Kill the witch!" the matron shrieked. "Kill the monster before he infects you all." Some of the guards stepped forward, fear overriding their discipline. Then, a new sound cut through the panic. It was a slow, rhythmic clapping. Commander Vora stood on the edge of the dais. She had ascended during the chaos of the sink. She held a data slate in her hand, hooked directly into the hall's primary media port. "A witch?" Vora asked, her voice calm and biting. "Or just a better soldier than you?" "Matron?" Vora tapped the slate. The massive screens above the hall flared to life again. But this time, they didn't show the weapon. They showed a list. It was a scrolling database of names, thousands of them. "These are the victims of the mate protocol," Vora announced. "Warriors bonded to politicians against their will. Soldiers chemically leashed to corporate allies." She swiped the screen. A video file played, a recording of the matron signing the authorization for Vora's own forced bonding 20 years ago, trading Vora's loyalty for a shipping contract. "You call them witches," Vora said, looking at the matron with cold, dead eyes. "But they are the only ones who broke the spell. The Prime Ledger is real. The weapon was going to kill millions. And you are just a broker selling our blood for credits." The narrative collapsed. The bond witch lie disintegrated under the weight of the raw data. The crowd in the hall turned toward the matron, their expressions shifting from fear to a terrifying, silent judgment. The matron looked around. She saw her empire turning to ash. She reached into her robes and pulled out a heavy, ornate control rod, the master key to the city's infrastructure. "If I cannot rule this world," she hissed, backing toward the rear of the platform, "then no one will live to inherit it." She keyed a sequence into the rod. Kaylin saw the shift in the matron's stance. She knew that look. It was the look of a captain scuttling the ship. "She is triggering the core," Kaylin shouted. She shoved Elias behind a pillar and stepped forward, drawing her energy staff. "I challenge you!" Kaylin roared, her voice cracking with the force of the invocation. Under the right of accountability. The matron froze. The ancient law was binding, a formal challenge, issued before the people in the archive AIs, could not be ignored without forfeiting all legal authority instantly. If she ran, the automated defenses would target her. The matron laughed, a brittle sound. She dropped the heavy ceremonial robes, revealing a sleek, gold-plated combat suit beneath. She drew two vibroblades that hummed with a nasty, dissonant pitch. "You want to fight, little traitor?" The matron sneered. "I was killing challengers before your mother was born." She lunged. The duel was not the graceful dance of the arena. It was a brawl. The matron fought with dirty, pragmatic viciousness. She threw a handful of flash powder, blinding the sensors, and struck low, aiming for Kalen's knees. Kalen parried, but the force of the blow rattled her injured shoulder. She stumbled back, sparks raining down as their weapons locked. Elias, meanwhile, was scrambling under the console. She initiated a cascade failure in the ashlight grid. Elias yelled, typing furiously with blood-slicked fingers. "She is overloading the city's power core. It is going to detonate in 4 minutes. Fix it." Kalen grunted, deflecting a slash that would have taken her head off. "I am trying to reroute it," Elias shouted back, on the dais. The fight intensified. The matron was fast, augmented by illegal combat stims that pumped directly into her suit. She drove Kalen back, slashing the banners that hung from the ceiling, bringing the heavy fabric down to tangle Kalen's limbs. "You are weak," the matron spat, kicking Kalen in the chest. "You let emotions cloud your tactical subroutines." Kalen hit the ground hard, the breath driven from her lungs. The matron stood over her, raising both blades for a killing stroke. Kalen looked up. She saw Elias frantically working the console, ignoring the danger to keep the city from burning. She saw Vora holding the line against the loyalists. She felt the bond humming in her blood, not a leash, but a lifeline. "I am not weak," Kalen whispered. She didn't try to block the blades. She rolled forward, inside the matron's guard. She dropped her staff and drove her shoulder into the matron's midsection, tackling her to the glass floor. They grappled, armor screeching against armor. The matron clawed at Kalen's faceplate. Kalen grabbed the matron's wrists, pinning them to the ground. "I am not weak because I feel," Kalen gritted out, headbutting the matron. "I am strong because I have something to lose." She headbutted her again. The matron's mask shattered. Kalen ripped the control rod from the matron's belt and hurled it across the floor to Elias. "Elias, catch!" Elias lunged, catching the device out of the air. He jammed it into the port. Access granted. The computer chimed. "Stop the detonation," Kalen yelled, holding the struggling matron down. "I can't stop it," Elias yelled, his face pale as he read the diagnostics. "The reaction is already critical. I can't shut it down. I can only redirect it. Redirect it where? The only heat sink large enough to absorb the blast is the primary launch bay," Elias said. He looked at the readout, then he looked at the escape route they had planned to use. The launch bay was where their skiff, and every other ship capable of leaving the city, was docked. "If I send the blast there," Elias said, his voice quiet, "we are trapped. We can't get off-world." "Do it," Kalen commanded without hesitation. "But save the city. Elias!" Elias punched the command, rerouting thermal overload to Sector 4. The floor beneath them shook violently. A massive explosion roared in the distance, a pillar of fire erupting from the spaceport. The shockwave shattered the glass pillars of the hall, raining shards down on the crowd. The power core stabilized. The city was safe. Their escape route was a smoking crater. The matron stopped struggling and she went limp, staring up at the smoke-filled sky. "You fools," she whispered, blood bubbling on her lips. Now the fleets will come. You are just rats in a trap. Kaelin stood up, breathing hard. She looked down at the fallen tyrant. We are not rats, Kaelin said. We are the people you forgot to fear. She turned to Elias. He was slumped against the console, clutching his ribs. A piece of shrapnel from the explosion had caught him in the side. Elias. She was at his side in a second. I am okay, he wheezed, pressing his hand against the wound. Just leaked a little coolant. The hall was collapsing around them. The structural integrity of the spire was failing. We have to move, Kaelin said. I can't walk fast enough, Elias gritted out. You go. You can make the jump to the lower roof. Kaelin looked at the gap. Then she looked at him. Did you not hear me earlier? She asked, grabbing his arm. What? I said I am not leaving you. She didn't wait for an argument. She pulled him up. When his legs buckled, she didn't hesitate. She swept him up into her arms, carrying him like a child. This is humiliating, Elias muttered, his head resting against her battered chest plate. Shut up, bond attendant, Kaelin said, a fierce grin cutting through the grime on her face. Or I will drop you. She ran. She sprinted through the collapsing corridors, dodging falling masonry and arcing power lines. She vaulted over fissures in the floor, her boots skidding on the tilting surfaces. She didn't calculate the odds. She didn't weigh the survival math. She just held on to the man she loved and ran straight into the fire. The weeks that followed were a blur of political tectonic shifts. With the prime ledger exposed and the matron in custody, the high command fractured. The fleets, seeing the truth of the ashlight harvesting, refused to fire on the capital. The enemy at the gates dissolved when the soldiers realized the only enemy was the one sitting on the throne. A provisional council was formed, comprised of defecting generals, priestesses like Alara, and representatives from the colonized worlds. It was messy, loud, and fragile, but it was honest. Kaelin stood in the center of the great plaza. Her armor was stripped of the gold filigree. Her rank insignia had been removed. She was no longer a high champion. Technically, under the new laws, she was a citizen awaiting pardon. But the crowd didn't care about the laws. Thousands of Valkyrie and off-worlders filled the square. They didn't cheer. They just watched her with a reverence that terrified her more than any weapon. They chanted her name, low and steady. To them, she wasn't a traitor. She was the shield breaker, the woman who woke them up. She stood stiffly, uncomfortable in the plain tunic of a civilian. Elias stood beside her. He was leaning on a cane, his side heavily bandaged, but he was upright. He wore a simple suit, refusing the ceremonial robes the council had offered him. Step forward. Elias, Kaelin whispered. They want to hear from the human who saved the city. Elias shook his head. No, he said. They don't need a savior. Saviors are dangerous. They need a witness. He walked to the microphone. The drones hovered, broadcasting his face to the galaxy. He didn't look like a hero. He looked like a tired mechanic who had seen too much. I am not here to tell you what to do, Elias said, his voice scratching over the speakers. I am just here to tell you what I saw. I saw a system that convinced you that your cruelty was kindness. I saw good people do terrible things because they were told it was the only way to survive. He looked at the crowd, meeting the gaze of a young Valkyrie soldier in the front row. You have a choice now, Elias said. It is the hardest thing you will ever have. You have to choose to build something without using the bones of others to support the foundation. Do not look at me for the blueprint. Look at each other. He stepped back. He didn't raise his fist. He didn't shout a slogan. He just stepped back into the shadow of the woman he loved. The The spaceport was a ruin, but the secondary hangars were functional. A small, nondescript corvette sat on the pad. It had no banners, no fleet markings. It was a salvage ship, patched together from 3 different hulls. It was ugly, scarred, and perfect. Kaylin walked up the ramp, throwing a duffel bag over her shoulder. Elias followed, limping slightly. "Are you sure about this?" Elias asked, pausing at the airlock. "The council offered you a seat. You could be general of the new army." Kaylin stopped. She turned to look at the city, the obsidian spires now draped in white flags of truce, the bioluminescent rivers glowing softly in the twilight. "I have spent my whole life being a weapon," she said. "I do not want to be a general. I do not want to give orders." She looked at Elias. "I want to fix what I broke. There are a dozen worlds out there bleeding because of wars I fought. I want to go to them. I want to help them rebuild, not as a conqueror, just as help. Laborers," Elias suggested. "Something like that." She smiled. She reached out and took his hand. The bond between them settled into a warm, steady hum. It wasn't the overwhelming torrent of the sink anymore. It was a quiet knowing, a comfort. "And you?" she asked. "You could go back to Earth. You could be famous." Elias looked at the ship. He looked at the stars. "I think I am done with salvage," he said. "I think I am ready to do some construction. Besides, someone has to keep your armor polished. You are terrible at maintenance." Kaylin laughed, a sound that felt lighter than it ever had before. She pulled him closer. The humor faded, replaced by a fierce, quiet intensity. "Elias," she said. "Yeah?" "I am still scared," she admitted. "The bond, the chemicals. Sometimes I still wonder if it is just biology." Elias rested his forehead against hers. "It probably is partially," he said honestly. "We are biological creatures. Kaylin. We are meat and electricity. But biology is just the hardware. Love is the software we choose to run on it." He kissed her. It wasn't the desperate kiss of the battlefield. It was slow, deliberate, a promise made in a quiet room. "I choose you," Elias whispered against her lips. "Every day. Even when the chemicals fade. Even when we are old and arguing about navigation charts. I choose you." Kaylin closed her eyes, breathing him in. "And I choose you," she whispered back. They stood there for a long moment, 2 small figures against the backdrop of a recovering world. Then, they turned and walked into the ship. The airlock hissed shut. The engines fired, not with the roar of a warship, but with the steady, reliable thrum of a vessel meant for a long journey. The ship lifted off, banking away from the city, away from the politics and the parades. It turned its nose toward the dark, vast ocean of stars. They didn't know exactly where they were going. They didn't know what they would find. But as the ship jumped to hyperspace, leaving a streak of light in the void, they knew they weren't running away. They were running towards something. Truth didn't win once and for all. It had to be lived, protected, and practiced every day. And love wasn't an escape from the universe. It was the fuel required to change it. Uncertain but unafraid, they flew into the dark.